So everyone, I made a video about a week ago where I mentioned that these calves here would stay with their mums until they're 6 or 8 months old, and a few people had little questions, so I thought I'd just take you through what basically will happen with these cows and calves over the next year and a bit. And I'm going to talk about this in a way assuming that the cow calved naturally without intervention and that the calf is nice and healthy. So the pens of all the cows to calve are over here. So the cow calves, she has her calf. I'll then go and straight away I'll spray that calf's navel with iodine, and that'll stop infections. It'll also help that navel dry up quicker, which will also help stop infections. And then the calf will stay in these pens for about 24 to 48 hours, just depending on what time it was calved. Now, providing it's had no problems, it's up, it's sucking, it's doing everything right, after about like I say, between 24 to 48 hours, that calf will then be tagged and brought into the nursery pen where we have these first 5 cows which have calves. And like I say, it is not standard to take calves away from beef calves. So it's not standard to take calves away from beef cows. In the dairy industry it is, but with beef cows and their calves, we don't milk beef cows, so there's no reason to take the calves off, and taking the calves off would just make extra work for us. So once there are about 20 calves and cows in this pen, they'll go across to the far away shed, and that has the cows in it which are furthest away from calving, and they'll come across into those pens. Then at the end of April or the beginning of May, it's kind of weather dependent, but as soon as the ground dries up enough for the cows to go out, all the cows and calves, well, the cows will be taken up to the other farm in a lorry, and the calves will follow in a trailer. Now, they can't go together because that would be dangerous for the calves. Cows could trample calves in the lorry, so they go up separately. Then they're reunited again up at the other farm. Then once they're up there, the cows will be split into 3 groups. So we have 3 bulls, and they'll be split into 3 groups, and each group will go out with a bull to the hills. We have 2 hills, so 2 groups will go out to the hill. Both hills are about 200 acres with no interior fencing, which is pretty small for a hill. I know some people with hills up to 5,000 acres, but our hills are pretty productive. They're very grassy and they're very good for the cows. The calves and their mothers will then spend all of the summer and the autumn out in the hills, and then as winter starts to come in, we'll bring them in closer to the farm, and then as the weather starts to deteriorate, the calves will be spayed off, at which point they'll be about 6-8 months old. In the months leading up to this, the calves will have become basically independent. The cows will have started to dry off, and they'll be starting to wean their calves off anyway. So we'll just do that in a controlled way. We'll spain the calves off all in one day, and what will happen is they'll basically just be separated. The gate to the field will be left open for the mums. The calves will be put in the shed. After about 2 days, most of the cows will have left and went back out to the fields, and the calves will be in the shed. At this point too, there are very different dietary needs from the calves and cows. So these calves, which will be around 200 to 300 kilos by that point, and they'll be grown at a rate from anywhere from 1 kilo to 3 kilos a day. So they'll be needing a super high protein diet, super high energy for growing. So they'll get first cut silage. So first cut is basically the spring silage, which has a lot of grass sugars and a lot of protein. Whereas the cows at this point will be in the first half of pregnancy, and they need a very different diet. They need to fill their bellies, obviously, but they also need a lot of vitamins and minerals, but they don't need as much protein and sugar, because protein and sugar to a cow in that stage of pregnancy doesn't really go to the cow, it goes straight to the calf, and then they grow these great big massive calves which are impossible to calve. You end up with lots of calving problems. You could potentially end up losing calves and even a cow, and you could end up with a lot of cesareans and things like that. So that wouldn't be ideal. So the dietary needs change from what the calves need and what the cows need at that point. Then obviously the cows stay inside for 4 or 5 months. Calving season comes around, and it's exactly what we're doing now. Over here at the calves, well, the calves will be over at the other shed, and they'll all be mixed in together. All those 3 groups that were split in, they all go back in together in the shed. They'll be fed throughout the winter, and then when the ground's dry enough, they'll go out to the nice big grass parks, which are up the back of my house. So they're really grassy. They're not like the hills, they're not as rough, but It's really good grass, really productive grass for them, so that'll help them put on a bit more weight. And then in the sort of late summer, autumn is when we start taking calves, which aren't calves at that point. They're about a year and a half old, probably approaching 600 kilos at that point. That's when we'll take them to market